after a big game, I've often asked you guys, what surprised you, what took you off guard, but based on what you both had to say prior to the game, I don't really think that there was anything there, Kevin.
No, I mean, I felt that Ohio State definitely was the better team and was going to go out and impose their will. I didn't see them getting into the 50s, to be quite honest. So that was a bit of a surprise. J.K. Dobbins, they're riding him right now. He's getting hot at the right time. Before the Penn State game, didn't have more than 24 carries in a game. Now has got a couple of games with 30-plus carries. I expect that to continue this week. And, especially with some durability issues with Justin Fields at quarterback, with him going down on the field a couple times and having to wear the bigger, less mobile steel knee brace and not necessarily being the same runner in that brace as he is in the lighter one. I think that they're going to have to, continue with that. So, and I think that with Michigan getting back into that game, when you look at their offense, it was exactly what I expected, that they were not going to be able to run the ball, that they would have some success throwing the ball. Ohio State would make some adjustments, wash, rinse, repeat, and that's what happened.
Yeah, and this one always comes down to, can you run the ball? And we knew going in that Michigan can't run the ball. And not that they can't run the ball against Ohio State. They can't run the ball against Maryland. They can't run the ball against Indiana. They can't run the ball against anybody. So how in the world were they going to run it against Ohio State? And, I heard it from Michigan fans. They're throwing the ball so well. Not just Michigan fans. National media guys talking about how Michigan's offense has turned the corner since the second half of the Penn State game. It's a meme at this point. The second half of the Penn State game. They really didn't do much. They threw the ball well. They still couldn't run it. And if you can't run it, what kind of offensive turnaround do you have? You're just throwing the ball a bunch, and that's not going to do you anything. If you go into the Ohio State-Michigan game one-dimensional, that dimension better be running the ball. If it's passing the ball, your quarterback will eventually be abused and get taken to task. And Shea Patterson came out pretty well, compared to what some quarterbacks have. But Ohio State has shown you this entire century, if you want to win this game, you run the ball, and that's something Michigan hasn't been able to do since Denard Robinson was around.
I'm going to play devil's advocate just because Michigan needs some kind of support and some kind of representation here to some extent. And I hate to be the guy to do that. No, they don't. 28-16 at the half. Obviously, some had said, and it's easy to say after the game, that Michigan should have went for the touchdown on the second of the field goals instead of kicking the field goal. 28-20 would have looked different, obviously, than 28-16. There were also a couple trips in the red zone, one in which they did kick the field goal after recovering a fumble. The other, obviously, Robert Landers jumped on the Shea Patterson miscue in which he took his eyes off the ball, didn't catch the snap. And so Michigan did throw for 250 in the first half, did throw it effectively, minus Sean Wade in the Ohio State secondary, and had their opportunities. Of course, they kept a drive alive for Ohio State once the defense had stopped the Buckeyes on a 4th and 4, which the special teams jumped off sides. So there were those glimpses in which you could put together a few threads in which that would have vaulted Michigan into a pretty close game at halftime.
Well, I think it was a close game at halftime, but when you're saying, well, if Jim Harbaugh would have gone for the touchdown instead of field goals, I mean, that would have been great for them. They should have. You can't beat Ohio State with field goals, and if you think you can, I'm going to remind you that Jim Tressel is no longer the head coach at Ohio State. He was a few coaches ago. You could beat Jim Tressel with field goals, provided you played an almost flawless game. If you think you're going to beat Ryan Day with field goals, you're going to have to kick about 20 of them. So if you think you've got enough possessions and you think you got a kicker who's going to hit all 20 of those field goals, go for it. But, Michigan made some plays. They did some things, but there's two halves. And to turn the ball over like they did, you have to expect that because that's what Shea Patterson does. That's what Michigan does. And so, yes, if Michigan would have played a flawless game, they may have been tied at halftime.
Tony, let's brush up on the metrics. 19 field goals would have been 57 points. They could have gotten away with that.
But Ohio State would have been able to. They would have kept trying to score in the fourth quarter even more. So I would still think 22 or so.
Exactly, and Quinn Nordine not exactly consistent. They miss an extra point. I mean, they're going to kick 22 field goals after they kick the extra point. I think not. So, and we know all about missing field goals and extra points. We could just talk about that Ole Miss game earlier in the week in the Egg Bowl and that whole situation. But it is a 4-quarter game, and being close at halftime is a great moral victory. It's the September Heisman, but you're not winning the game, and Michigan's got a trophy case full of September Heismans. But Ohio State made the adjustments and really was able to put its foot on the accelerator when it needed to, make some big plays. J.K. Dobbins, 4 touchdowns, a career high for him. Justin Fields, 302 yards, if I remember right, 4 touchdowns there. Garrett Wilson stepping up and having his big game, playing the role of Chris Olave from last year, another freshman Wolverine killer at that point. So we know if that holds true, expect Garrett Wilson to have a big play or two in the Big Ten championship game as well. So it was really questionable, some of the things that they did. And if you're Don Brown after that game, how do you feel? I mean, you've given up 63 and 56 to Ohio State. You're supposed to be this defensive maven, and it certainly hasn't happened.
Against 95% of the country, 96, 98% of the country, I think he is. But when you have Ohio State, who has answers to pretty much everything, running or throwing, it's difficult to compare yourself to them or think you can shut them down. But yeah, they've been getting lit up these last 2 seasons more than they should. And I've seen Michigan fans kind of are okay with the rumors of Don Brown going back to BC. Like, that would be fine. And, we saw what new blood on defense did for Ohio State this last year. I still think Michigan needs more talent and, more talent on defense, which Ohio State had the talent. And so the coaching comes in and everything goes great. Michigan could maybe get some better coaching, but I don't know how much better the talent's going to get in a year.
Yeah, the cycle is not immediate. I mean, they have a great defensive player in Daxton Hill who can't come on quickly enough for them at that point. Mm-hmm. Devin Bush, Chase Winovich, Rashawn Gary, they're not walking through that door except for alumni functions for, part of that 0-4 against Ohio State club, reunion that they'll have. But, aside from that, they're out of eligibility. I mean, fake mustache and bad glasses or something like that. Maybe they can sneak their way back out there. But, and that's not taking anything away from the dudes that they got right now, but they gave up 63 last year with a much more talent-rich defensive squad. So, maybe I should have seen 56 coming because, it wasn't a case of that they were going to out-athlete Ohio State because they weren't going to do that. Maybe I was just buying into that they'd all bought into the scheme and they were playing well, but, it wasn't necessarily a case that they were that they were getting everybody to the ground when they should and whatnot. Ohio State, as Tony said, had an answer for every adjustment that they made. Ohio State, was playing 4D chess.
Yeah, that alumni club, they keep having to change venues to get bigger rooms each year, because they keep growing beyond what the fire marshal allows. And so this next year maybe they just go for like a big banquet hall. That way they can keep it for a few years.
How about Comerica Park?
Come on.
Tony, you made the comment that this is a better defense or different defensive personnel. Are you referring to the players on the field? Or are you referring to the coaching staff defensively?
For Ohio State or Michigan?
Yeah, Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the same defense, but it's the coaches that changed everything and made everybody better and put them in better situations. And yes, you can put Michigan's players in better situations, but they don't have a lot of difference makers, guys who can go and make plays regardless of what scheme or whatever they're in. I mean, who on a defensive line do they have? Aiden Hutchinson, who maybe should move inside rather than playing defensive end because he may not be quick enough for that. Kwity Paye, who sometimes does stuff and sometimes disappears for weeks on end. Defensive tackles, they had like maybe 3 that play. There's not a lot of talent, not a lot of depth. They got a freshman 5-star Chris Hinton on a defensive line. He played a little bit this past week, but was a non-factor all year long. They need to recruit better than they have been. The bottom half of their classes are usually not very good, and the top half turn over way more than anybody else in the nation, way more than they should. A lot of misses, a lot of medical guys.
On the other hand, they might be able to find somewhere off someone.
Right. It's just really odd. I mean, you sit there, you don't see a lot of overlap in terms of Michigan's recruiting board and Ohio State's recruiting board. And Michigan, you do you recruit the guys that you need and whatnot, and who you think is going to fit into your scheme. But, at some point, one win in 16 years or whatever the hell it's been. I mean, you might want to take a look at Ohio State's board and see what it is that they're doing there at that point. I mean, Michigan goes out and beats SEC teams for, some Southern kids and whatnot. You can't – I'm not going to let the rivalry blind me in terms of what it is that they're able to do. But, I mean, it's a lot of high-risk, high-reward type of situations, or high-risk, high-reward. And then they're getting burned on some of these kids. A lot of guys are jumping in the transfer portal, and it's only going to get worse as things are going on. And, Michigan largely has abandoned recruiting the state of Ohio. And when you sat there and you looked at what they were able to do during 2-10-1 and around that thing, they were able to come into the state of Ohio and pull a lot of kids. It didn't hurt having a Mario Manningham that sat there and was like, I'm going to Michigan. I'm not even going to look at Ohio State. Being able to go and get guys like that. But now at this point, when you look at the kids that they go after Ohio, I mean, nothing against the kids that they're getting, but they're beating out Indiana and Illinois for guys. They're not even competing with Ohio State. They're not even necessarily competing with Kentucky. And and I think that their evaluation has just been way off.
Well, basically, to look at the Michigan roster and look at the teams that they've trotted out ever since Jim Harbaugh took over and his first team elevated to 10-3 and a top 10 finish in the country, we could insert Penn State, Wisconsin, and Michigan State circa 2010 to 2016. And wouldn't those teams not be quite as talented as these Michigan teams and fared at least respectably against Ohio State? It's some combination of talent gap, coaching gap, psyche, all of this working against them, and it's just steamrolling down the hill against them.
Well, there is also the fact that 365 days Ohio State is talking and thinking about Michigan. They're not doing that with Michigan State or Wisconsin or Purdue or Iowa. It's Michigan. And when you combine all of those factors and the fact that Ohio State really, really, really wants to beat you every single year, then they set their mind to it. And Ryan Day was talking this week about how he felt more relief than joy in beating Michigan because there is so much pressure. He said you can't have this job and not beat them. So that's an entire attitude change or just a way of life, as Urban Meyer says, that Ohio State has. Like, you can't lose this game. And Michigan does not have that same perspective or that same perception.
And
you would think – go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say, just talk about the pressure on Ryan Day. You don't want to be that coach after all the success that starts 0-1 in the series, because then doubt starts to creep in and whatnot, and they start to gain confidence and whatnot. So – to heck with all the, they hadn't lost to them 7 straight and whatnot. I mean, there was a lot of pressure in there just to keep the balance, of the universe in order. If you're an Ohio State fan, you needed to sit there and win this game. 2020 comes back to Columbus with, a final year, Justin Fields. And then, 2021 going back up to Ann Arbor. Will Jim Harbaugh be there? I mean, I'm sure we could do another show on that situation, but there is so much pressure there. Obviously Ohio State really had to empty the bucket for what it was that they did out there.
Ohio State co-defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley, real quick, Mark, was Ryan Day was relaying a story that after the game, they get back to the football facility at Ohio State and looking around at all of the Michigan stuff, the Michigan signage and the countdown clocks, and Halfley told Day, like, could you imagine coming back to this if we had lost? It's like you can't allow it to happen because of how much energy you put into it. And when you do put that much energy into something, that's kind of, you get out what you put in. Ohio State puts an awful lot into this thing, and they pay attention to Michigan's recruiting class. They have Michigan's recruiting class up on a wall. They compare it to their own, and they pay attention to what Michigan does in all things. And I don't know that Michigan does that, because then maybe it's a defeatist thing where you see how far you have to go, and you just don't want to be reminded of that. You stay in your lane, maybe for Michigan, whereas Ohio State, when Urban Meyer got here, he targeted Alabama. And then, they've always stayed focused on Michigan. And I think Michigan maybe just worries about Michigan. And if you're only worried about Michigan, enjoy your 9-3 every year.
Well, I want to jump in one more time before Mark takes control of his show back. We remember the guy before Jim Tressel who viewed Michigan as just another game. And we saw what the record was there. And John Cooper did a lot of great things while he was in Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
He won a lot of games, just not Michigan games or bowl games or Illinois. But outside of that, he won a lot of games. But when you bring somebody in who doesn't understand the rivalry, didn't grow up with it, or at least, watch it as more than just a casual observer, that's what happens. And Michigan appears to be watching it as a casual observer, because there have been a lot of times that they've been out there playing like a casual participant.
I was hired at my current job a couple weeks after the Ohio State win in 2001 under Jim Tressel, when he guaranteed the win at the basketball game, and then they finally won. And that streak was not, I know that Ohio State fans look back and think, oh, we always lost in the 90s. We always lost under John Cooper. Yes, aside from a tie 10 out of 12 times. But, they were only a couple years removed from an 11-1 team that went to the Sugar Bowl and beat Michigan in 1998. So there was no 15 consecutive years, albeit the interim coach, Luke Fickell. I'll throw that one out just to make the comparison. There was nothing close to what the drought Michigan's suffering right now. His comment to me at the time was, I'm glad that you guys won this year. This is getting boring, beating you guys every year. Well, to make the comparison between what Michigan was doing to Ohio State in 2000 and those preceding years versus what's going on now, there is no comparison in the dominance. It's not even close. And again, Tony is highlighting what Jim Harbaugh is doing in Michigan as being this 9-3 treadmill, basically. Ohio State was going into those games top 5 in the nation 4 times and, having their season ruined. So they weren't a top 15 program that happened to be not as good and not ready for this game. It's just an oddity that this continues to be a focus for Ohio State, and the psychology that Urban Meyer and, Jim Tressel started, but Urban Meyer was able to take the handoff appropriately and just continue it. And now Ryan Day, that they can sell these kids on this game being this enormous and this huge, when the natural inclination of a 20-year-old would be, what are you talking about? We're Ohio State. We kill these guys all the time. What's the big deal? We're going to do it again, just to stay that laser focused. And for Ryan Day not even to have grown up in this rivalry and to take it on. I know you guys were at the stadium, but I don't know if you saw the post-game interview by Fox after the game at midfield. I've never seen Ryan Day so emotional. You could tell, to your point, Kevin, he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, and he mentioned the responsibility of winning this game. So he felt it. He felt relieved, and he knew this is vital.
Oh, absolutely. You have the backdrop of, you sell this to all these recruits you bring in. Obviously, this game is on the road, but it's about the game and the gold pants and everything else. And you have this tremendous backdrop, and you come up short in it. As a first-year coach, people will sit there and say, "Well, is he just really riding the coattails of Urban Meyer in terms of the cupboard that he had with all the kids in there. What's it gonna be like when he has to stand on his own 2 feet? But now that he's able to go out there, he wins his first one in very convincing fashion. He's putting together a tremendous recruiting class of his own. I'm hearing a lot less people, except for the true haters out there, trying to call Ryan Day Larry Coker.
My son, when he watched the first touchdown scored by Michigan, actually cheered. He cheered, and it wasn't a mock cheer. It was. He actually cheered, which I can't understand that.
I hope you grounded him. I hope you grounded him.
Well, he's 23 years old. I'm kind of past that point. I could have kicked him out of the house, I guess. I want to watch the game with somebody.
I think you should still ground him.
He tells me every year, you get up for this game, you sell it, you show me the hype videos. I see all the hype videos and everything a half hour before the game, and he goes, you old people are still psyched out by this game. And he goes, it's Michigan State and Wisconsin. Those have been the 2 toughest teams in the Big Ten since I've been watching. And until Michigan shows me different, I'm not really going to get too excited about this game. So he came out of his chair when Michigan scored. He goes, we might have a game. Well, wasn't the case, but
there is a danger to an entire generation thinking they're born on third base with this rivalry, or being stuck in the dugout or out in the parking lot, I guess, if you're a Michigan fan, not getting tickets to the game. But you don't want to see, I'm not saying it's time for Michigan to win. I don't want Buckeye fans to hear me say that, but you don't want to just you don't want to see, like, we grew up with this thing and we love it, and it's just part of your DNA. And as the DNA changes, maybe it's shifting to where the younger generation, those darn kids, those millennials, the millennials have killed the Michigan rivalry. You hope they still keep an appreciation for what this is, because when you look at the football facilities at Ohio State and you talk to the players and the coaches, it's a part of them. And it's one of the reasons they do what they do is because of that game, and to be in that game with their brothers. And it's a real live thing. And if people on the outside lose sight of that, that's unfortunate for them.
See, Michigan is pompous enough, and I actually have a Michigan guy come on just about every week, and he will attest and admit to this, that they're pompous enough as a university and a football program, as an offshoot to the university's approach to things, is that they are Michigan, and we shouldn't put too much attention on any one goal or opponent or rival. Yes, this is important. It's our rival, but we shouldn't lower ourselves to just being paranoid about this and tunnel visioned. Well, it's not working. Although I got to say, Jim Harbaugh says the right things. He gives the utmost respect and value to the rivalry. He's just not he hasn't cracked the code, but it seems like he cares enough. And if it's certainly gotten his attention by now at 0-5.
I'll answer questions, but not your insults.
It took Ohio State putting their foot down, Jim Tressel putting his foot down, and the entire football program putting their foot down after the John Cooper era to say enough. And it's going to take Michigan doing the same thing to stop this. If they don't want to make it important, then they can enjoy losing the final regular season game 9 out of 10 years every decade. And if they're okay with that, that's fine. They can enjoy their rivalry with Michigan State or their rivalry with Notre Dame, which is going to go away and then it'll come back and nobody cares except for Michigan and Notre Dame. But if you're happy with a rivalry with Michigan State, then fine. There are bigger things out there in college football. The biggest thing out there in college football is the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. And if you're saying you're done, like you don't want to do it anymore, that's pretty sad, man.
Somebody's got to play in the Outback Bowl.
They need a couple teams every year. Sure. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, talking Ohio State. We got Tony Gerdeman on the line from theozone.net. Please join him. Tremendous work that he does over there. You can hear the insight and the information right here every week with Tony. So grab some more there at theozone.net. Ditto with Kevin Noon from Rivals Buckeye Grove. Thanks to both of you and Steve Hellwagon, of course, and Claire Crawford coming on here and supplying us with Ohio State football talk. People enjoy it, and the numbers continue to grow. We got 143 on the line after the beatdown of Michigan, and this should certainly continue to get interesting as we dive into a Big Ten championship game and most likely a college football playoff appearance over the next month to 5 weeks. I guess we can turn the page on Michigan, although I just don't know where they find answers. I'm going to throw that one last narrative out there. Where did they go from here? They do seem to be at a recruiting disadvantage, both in regards to their in-state talent versus Ohio's in-state talent, although much of the roster obviously comes from outside the state. Ohio State's a national program. Michigan is a national program. What would you guys do if you were running the show with that administration, with this football program?
Kevin?
I'd fold the program, but I'm obviously biased. I mean, I don't know. A lot of Ohio State fans are like, "Oh, good, maybe they could run off Jim Harbaugh now." I think you like Jim Harbaugh where he is right about now, but I think you have to do a deep dive in everything it is you're doing. And I understand they went out to go get Josh Gaddis, and they were going to completely redo this offense. Yet they didn't until the second half of the Penn State game. And then, I think some of that, though, was born out of the fact that they couldn't really run the ball. I mean, obviously losing Chris Evans for the entire season was a big hit. He's a talented kid. I like him as a runner. But, I think you really have to do a deep dive and see if your heart is in it. I mean, is your heart in it to sit there and go for it? Go out there, get in those recruiting battles. I mean, you're not necessarily – Ohio State doesn't land every kid that they go after. I promise you that. I mean, under Jim Tressel, when they built a fence around the state of Ohio, yeah, they were batting about 980 inside the state of Ohio, and then they would go hunting in Florida and Pennsylvania and Georgia and get land some kids. They would identify some under the radar guys and go with that. I think Michigan really needs to reevaluate his recruiting strategy. I don't know. I'm not one to go in and be saying, hey, you need to shake up the coaching staff, but I think we're seeing a lot of the same things happening over and over again. And if you're trying to elevate this, you may need to sit there and take a look at some of the people that you have going there, because I don't see the development at Michigan that you see at other Big Ten schools, not named Ohio State even. Let's just not even sit there and make this an Ohio State versus Michigan thing. I don't know if I see the same type of development at Michigan that I see it at Minnesota, that I see at Wisconsin, that I see in certain years at Iowa. Iowa is, they ride the wave up and down a lot, but I don't know. There's no simple answer there, but what they're doing right now is not working. They're just beating their head against a wall. And while it's really funny for Ohio State fans to watch it, I mean, I've watched enough Michigan podcasts and listened to them and seen all that I'm almost starting to feel bad for them. Almost.
Hey, Tony, before you jump in, I want to address the comment on the screen. So Dennis Wilson says, real cocky talk from Ohio State, 9-3 not so long ago. It was you all. Okay, Dennis. 7-1 in conference play is the worst. I want to underline that. Let that sink in. 7-1, the worst under Urban Meyer / Ryan Day / Jim Tressel without an interim coach in conference play since 2004. That's the worst record. Okay, the last time Ohio State lost 3 games in the regular season was 2004. 2004, 15 years ago. So that's a long time ago. And if you want to compare that to another supposed top program that gets a lot of attention on my channel, I addressed Miami football and looked at their last 15 years in which they're winning 56% of their games. And there have been 41 teams across the nation been ranked in the top 10 in the final AP poll in the last 15 years, and none of them are named Miami. And I say that because I know Dennis is a Miami fan. All right, Tony, you get the floor.
Gosh, where to begin? The the lack of development is huge, and that was one of the things I thought was going to be fixed under Jim Harbaugh, because I assumed he developed guys pretty well at Stanford to see guys become something from there, where you don't necessarily have a bunch of 4- and 5-star guys other than Andrew Luck, which, hey, great. What a coincidence that your quarterback is good when he's Andrew Luck. But then when you see the lack of development and you're getting guys in the top 100 who never contribute for you, you just had one linebacker enter the transfer portal yesterday or today, where I think the 2017 class I was looking at, it was 30 guys and 6 of them ended up as starters. I mean, that's terrible. And yes, you're losing some to medical, but that's every class. That's every school. So the lack of guys who contribute in a meaningful way and then just occupy space, that's really taken them down. How do you fix that? I think they need more energy, and I don't know that that's Jim Harbaugh's deal anymore. He used, enthusiasm unknown to mankind. When you watch him, you don't see that. When you watch if you guys saw the Amazon Prime show a couple of years ago, there was no energy there. It was a depressing show. It was depressing meeting rooms, watching these players and the coaches. And when he talks about attacking each day with an enthusiasm unknown to mankind, you don't see it. And I don't know how often the players see it. And I don't know what the players think of him. And, we see what we see of him. And it's very odd, very uninspiring, quirky. And you wonder, how much different is he behind the scenes? And if he was much different, you'd think they'd get better results. And yeah, it's really tough, darn near impossible to compete against Urban Meyer and come out successful. And now you're still competing against Urban Meyer's wake, basically, with Ryan Day. And maybe that boat just keeps going. And it looks like it will. So it's tough to compete against Ohio State like that. But Penn State can do it. Michigan State has done it. Purdue and Iowa have done it. And yeah, as we talked about, Ohio State focuses more on Michigan. But you should be able to put something together to do this. And the fact that he hasn't, it speaks to his program, the lack of energy, the lack of desire. I mean, look at Rashawn Gary. 3 years did nothing. I don't care what anybody says. He was underperforming every single year. Chase Winovich ran circles around him, as well as, and Rashawn Gary ran circles around nobody, including left and right tackles. And it was just another example. Even Jabril Peppers, that predates Jim Harbaugh, but they need to get more out of their big guys, their big stars, and they're really not. And the longer quarterbacks play for Jim Harbaugh, the worse they get at Michigan, which is a disturbing thing when he is supposed to be this quarterback guru. So if players don't get better under him and he's not able to recruit at a high level, and recruiting is getting worse, I believe, Kevin, these are all directions which are not good. None of this math is good. And I don't think he has performed in a manner to get fired. But if you want to keep up with Ohio State, it's going to be somebody else that has to do it.
To respond to Nothing News comment on the screen, he says, can you imagine allowing John Cooper, to go 0-5 against the team up north? Well, John Cooper did go 0-5, so he lost his first game in 88, 89, 90, 91. Then he tied a game in 92. Then he lost another game in 93. So he started 0-5-1. So that was allowed at that point. We don't know. It's a different era, different administration. That was almost 30 years ago, whether that would be allowed out of an Ohio State coach now. But certainly I remind people that John Cooper was fired after going 8-3 in the regular season, in which he lost to Michigan again. And so not a whole lot of coaches across the country getting fired after going 8-3 in the regular season, but he had lost way too many to Michigan at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, don't sell that 92 game short, the tie, the greatest win in Ohio State history, according to a university president that still is very well liked around these parts, who's now in Morgantown. I can't imagine. I mean, we're in a cycle of where coaches might only get 1 year, to be quite honest. I mean, it's infrequent. 2 seems to be kind of the basement right now, but we've seen 1. Remember, coach at Southern Miss only getting 1, a former Auburn assistant. So yeah, you need to perform quickly at that, and I mean, especially if you don't have a direct tie into your school. But Jim Harbaugh certainly is doing enough to he wins all the games that he's supposed to win, maybe save 1 here or there, but he loses all the games that everybody expects him to lose, maybe save 1 or save 2. But one other issue too is that, look, I understand that we have turnover chains and hard hats and lunch boxes and whatever the heck out there. But, Michigan and its grand gestures of having its 62-39 shirt or having a sweatshirt with Greg Battison's picture on it or whatnot, if you're going to do that kind of stuff, you better back it up. I mean, it looks really, it's a bad look when you sit there and you go for these little trinkets and baubles and whatnot, and you're not able to back it up. Maybe you need to focus a little bit more internally and not sit there and try and have some revenge tour merchandise that now is just the butt of a lot of jokes.